The moment is now. Are you ready?
Hello, my name is Damyan, I'm from Bulgaria, and in this video I'm going to show you how to win the game with two of the officially named Armis setups. So the two setups I chose are the Jester boot and the talking piece but thinking setup. So that means that in this video I'm going to play two games in a row in order to show you both of the setups. So now I choose my most recent setup, which is the Jester boot, because in my previous game I played with this setup. And now I click in order to see my opponent's decision. So my opponent accepted my setup, which means my opponent is first to go. My opponent's pieces are the green pieces, and his setup zone is located into the south part of the board. I play with the red pieces and I'm located into the north part of the board. So my opponent started with moving his president next to the Polder Valley and the south port into the seaside. So now I'm going to push forward my Coast Guard onto the coastal waters. And now my Coast Guard is located onto the north corner of the coastal waters of the Great Sea. I really like to cover the coastal waters in advance in order to prevent any marine pieces onto the coastal waters. Now my western marine piece goes onto the coastal waters 2 blocks further from my Coast Guard. My opponent moves his marine piece from his setup zone into the expanse. So that means I might be able to organize something against my opponent's marine piece. Now I move my president deep into the expanse, and with my president now I threaten my opponent's marine piece, and at the same time I threaten my opponent's army. Which means that my opponent might lose one of his pieces. Yes, and that will be eventually his army. Now my opponent is able to capture my president with his marine piece, which is located into the eastern part of his setup zone, but at the same time I cover my president with my marine piece, which would mean that my opponent is going to lose his marine piece. My opponent decided to move his helicopter into the expanse next to his marine piece, so I just continue with capturing pieces from the setup zone of my opponent, and at the same time I'm out of the sight of all the offensive pieces of my opponent. Now I capture my opponent's jet, and now I'm out of the sight of my opponent's marine piece. At the same time I threaten my opponent's helicopter, but I'm not going to capture it because my opponent would immediately capture my president afterwards. My opponent moves his marine piece from the eastern part of his setup zone onto the coastal waters. I can really easily win the game now, I think. But in order to be sure that I'm not gonna have any further problems, I would like to try to organize something against my opponent's marine piece onto the coastal waters. So now I move my Coast Guard next to my opponent's marine piece onto the coastal waters in order to threaten my opponent's marine piece. Now my opponent decided to move his marine piece into the southeastern part of the eastern corridor. Now I capture my opponent's aircraft carrier with my president, and at the same time I am out of the sight of all the offensive pieces of my opponent. Even the nuke is not a danger for me because it is next to my opponent's flag. Okay, there it is. My opponent moved his vice president backwards, back into his setup zone in order to defend himself from my president. So what I'm going to do now is to provide assistance for my offense with my marine piece. So I move my marine piece from the coastal waters into my opponent's setup zone. So now I threaten my opponent's vice president. I also threaten my opponent's reserve. My opponent decided to move his president 2 blocks to the southeast. I don't understand this move actually. It doesn't help him for now. Now I immediately capture my opponent's vice president with my marine piece. And I am ready to capture my opponent's flag in 2 moves now. My opponent moved his president 1 block to the southwest, next to his diplomat. Now I proceed with capturing my opponent's flag. My opponent just lost his reserve. Now my marine piece is located onto the space where my opponent's reserve used to be. And with my next move I intend to win the game. Okay, that's a victory. So in this game I showed you how to win the game with using the Jester boot setup, which is one of the officially named Armis setups. So now we proceed to the next game. I click here for another game. Okay. And now I am going to arrange my pieces into the talking piece but thinking setup. Okay. I start with my diplomat. My reserve goes in front of my flag. My coast guard should be located next to my reserve. Then I have my nuke. I think my marine piece, one of my marine pieces should be next to my nuke. Then comes my army. I have my submarine here next to my reserve. My president next to my submarine, then my other marine piece. My aircraft carrier goes in front of my reserve. Then at the western side, my aircraft carrier has my helicopter. Then comes the media, the mover. The jet goes next to my marine piece and my mover. Now I place my religion next to my aircraft carrier, my child next to the religion, and my vice president next to my army, my child, and my marine piece into the western part of my setup zone. So this is the talking piece but thinking setup, which is one of the officially named Armis setups. So now I click and I wait for my opponent's decision. So my opponent decided to switch positions, which means I play with the green pieces at the south and my opponent plays with the red pieces at the north. That also means that I'm first to go. This is very interesting setup because in this setup I might be able to win the game in just few moves because we have opened this path through the eastern corridor, which looks directly to my opponent's flag and also to my flag. And I can go through this corridor with my president very easy. Anyway, I also should be careful for this tactics because my opponent can execute the same strategy in this moment. But okay, now 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. Now I move my marine piece, my western marine piece, onto the coastal waters. And now it is my opponent's turn. At the same time, I still cover my diplomat with my marine piece. So if my opponent decides to undertake something, I might be able to stop him with my marine piece onto the coastal waters. I'm talking about my opponent's president, which can go with 1, 2, 3 moves through the expanse and to capture my diplomat. So I should be very careful with this because my diplomat is located next to my flag. Of course, I can do the same strategy, as I already said. I think I have an idea. Now I move my vice president into the expanse. My opponent immediately moves his marine piece into the expanse, and my opponent is able to see both of my pieces, I mean my vice president and my army, into the expanse. So I should be careful, but the advantage I have here is that my army covers my vice president and my marine piece covers my vice president too and my army. So I don't think there is something to be worried about for now. Now I move my president 1 block to the east. And I expect for my opponent's move now. He decided to move his army from his setup zone into the eastern corridor. One, two, three. Now I would move my army next to my opponent's marine piece, where I'm safe with my army, and when I directly threaten my opponent's marine piece with it, at the same time I cover my army by my marine piece onto the coastal waters and my vice president into the expanse. I also cover my vice president with my marine piece and my army, so my pieces cover each other. My opponent immediately moved his marine piece onto the northeast part of the coastal waters of the Great Sea. So that means now it's my turn. So what I'm going to do now is to try to do the ricochet tactic, which means that I'm going to place my vice president somewhere, and I'm going to wait until my opponent captures my president and my vice president turns into a president, and I will be able to attack my opponent's flag with 1 move. So what I'm going to do now is to place my vice president onto the most western part of the board, which is located deeper into the expanse, deep into the expanse. At the same time, my army and my vice president cover each other. Okay, my opponent immediately captured my mover. And he undertook an offense against me with his marine piece from the coastal waters of the Great Sea. Now, if I capture my opponent's marine piece, he would immediately capture my marine piece with his second marine piece. But I don't think I have choice for now, because if I don't capture this piece, it would proceed with its offense. No, I think I have choice. I would wait until my opponent undertake a move. So now I continue with my plan with my president, because if my opponent decides to capture my marine piece with his marine piece into my setup zone, into the eastern part of my setup zone, I would immediately capture my opponent's marine piece with my marine piece on a space which is out of the sight of my opponent's second marine piece, which is located onto the coastal water of the Eastern Sea. So what I'm going to do now is to make him do the first move. At the same time, I cover all the pieces in my setup zone except my flag. But in order to go to my flag with his marine piece into my setup zone, my opponent should do two moves, which means that he would definitely go through the spaces I cover with both of my marine pieces. So I just proceed with my Rico head strategy. Now I move my president into the most eastern space of the board, which is located into the eastern corridor, and I expect my opponent to capture it with either his army or his marine piece. If he do not capture it, I am going to hit his army, to offend his army, and then to attack my opponent's diplomat. But he decided to capture it with his marine piece. So the Rico head's tactic is completed, and now I capture my opponent's flag with my president. Now my opponent just lost his reserve, and with my next move I would be able to capture my opponent's flag and to win the game, because my opponent doesn't have a piece to defend himself now into his setup zone. My president is out of the sight of all the offensive pieces of my opponent. Now my opponent just captured my marine piece with his marine piece into the eastern part of my setup zone, but that doesn't matter, because now I capture my opponent's flag and I win the game. So that's a victory. So in this video I show you how to win the game with two of the officially named army setup, which were the Jester boot into the previous game, and with the talking piece but thinking setup, which I showed you in this game. So thanks for watching, and bye!